everyone, and welcome to another episode of I Love This, You Should Too. I'm sorry if our voices sound kind of weird. We both have COVID, but we're trying to keep up with the podcasting. So I am Samantha. Here with me is my host, Indy Randawa.
I'm your host.
My host. My co-host.
And we are members of the Alberta Podcast Network, which is locally grown and community supported. So yeah, maybe we'll get a little housekeeping out of the way at the beginning. This is our first recording in our new, let's say, studio, but it's just our kitchen table in a different kitchen.
Just a new kitchen.
Because we moved finally, and soon we'll get a proper space set up.
Yeah.
But everything's a little delayed because, like Samantha said, we both have COVID now.
Yeah, I tested positive on Christmas Day. Indy's about 2 days behind me on symptoms, and we're just like having a ball.
Yeah. So rather than complain about it this whole time, which is very tempting.
Oh, it's so tempting.
We'll just say we're going to do our best to edit out the coughing. If you hear a little bit, you know what? Deal with it. It's a free podcast.
It's a free podcast and we have COVID.
But maybe another good thing to say is that we both took rapid tests and did not test positive initially. Samantha quarantined for 2 days before she tested positive. So if you're rapid testing, that's awesome. But it is not foolproof.
Yeah,
it does not get things right away. And we are both vaccinated, which people out there might be like, if you're vaccinated, why do you have it? No, the reason we are talking to you and still just at home with flu symptoms and not in a hospital is because we are vaccinated, and that's what the vaccine does. It does reduce transmission and greatly reduce symptoms, and we're both very grateful that we had the opportunity to get that when we did.
I would much rather be this ill, which is like quite ill, especially because neither of us have been sick in 2 years since the pandemic started, than be on a ventilator on like life support in a hospital right now. So thank you, vaccine scientists. You're welcome. Oh, nice. Very nice.
And today's episode is brought to you in part by Park Power. And since winter is definitely here in Edmonton, it's going to be about 49 below today with the wind chill. And people out there who are not from here think like, oh, you're exaggerating for effect. No, literally 49 below Celsius. And so maybe it's good that we're quarantined in this house and not going anywhere. Because I'm
pretty happy we don't have to drive anywhere right now.
But because of that, and now that we have a home, our energy costs are going to be increasing because we're going to be using things a lot more. And so this is a great time for us and listeners to look at their utility bills and ensure they are on the best plan. And Albertans have a choice who they pay their utility bills to, and Park Power is happy to provide free, no-obligations comparisons. If you decide to switch providers, it's easy, and you can feel good knowing that you are supporting a local business and helping give back to our communities with your utility bills, because Park Power actually donates a bunch to different charities and organizations that are local. Some of them are the Altview Foundation, which is for gender variant and sexual minorities, Muscular Dystrophy Canada, the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, the Saffron Center, which supports those affected by sexual violence, and some other great organizations. There's a bunch. I didn't even list them all. But if you want to find out more information about Park Power and see how you can switch over, you can visit them at parkpower.ca.
Well, that's such a great option for Albertans and sounds like a very good way to go if you also care about giving back.
And you should. Well, so today, let's get into the actual episode. We are talking about the 2008 Swedish vampire film, Let the Right One In. Oh, and this is the first foreign language film that we did where I didn't do the intro in that language.
Oh, yeah.
But the Swedes would have been angry at me anyway because I speak Norwegian, and I would just say it in Norwegian and be like, yeah, you guys get it, right? And they're like, that's Norwegian. It's different. But so maybe it's better that I didn't. It's a movie that I saw when it came out way back in 2008, or I might have seen it in 2009 because I think it came out close to the end of the year.
Okay.
And I really liked it then. I had a certain image in my mind, but I hadn't seen it in such a long time. I told Samantha I love this movie, and she saw it for the first time. So, Sam, I love this movie. Did you?
Solid 7. No, it's solid 8 out of 10.
8? So you did mention that 8 is love.
It's like a low love.
But it's love.
It's not quite love.
So your scale is a little slidey.
7. 7 out of 10. I liked it. Yes. I can appreciate it. I thought it was very cool. It's not one that I will watch for years to come and love forever.
It's true, because I think we also have different criteria for movies we love.
Mm-hmm.
I can say I love a movie, I watch it once every 15 years. Yeah. And I love that movie. You like to rewatch your loved movies pretty often.
Yes. And I'll like throw them on in the background or like whatever, because when you know a movie well enough, you can just kind of, fill it in with your imagination.
Right. And I definitely think this isn't a movie that I do want to rewatch over and over again. I like to watch it every now and then. And it's fine to take years off, but I do, upon this rewatch, agree. I still love this movie.
Oh, good.
So let's get into things. First, I want some of your takes on it, like what you liked, what you didn't, an overall generalized view. And then I want to talk a little bit about the world this movie creates in this little suburb. I want to talk about how this is or is not a horror movie, the horror elements of it. I'd like to talk a little bit about the childlike view and the differences with adults in this movie.
Okay.
And I definitely want to get your take on Eli and Oscar and their relationship. And I want to talk about the title and what it means to let the right one in and the nature of kind of like being an outsider, because I think that's one of the key themes of this movie. Mm-hmm. So if you're not familiar with us, we are going to do all spoilers from here on out. We definitely recommend you go watch this movie. It's available on free streaming services like Hoopla, so you can go check it out. So no reason that you wouldn't have had the chance to see it. And if you have the option, do not listen to the dubbed version.
Oh, it's so terrible. We were just doing notes before the podcast, and sometimes we like to just rewatch a little bit. That dub is terrible. It sounds like a completely different movie, and it totally ruins it.
And now I think you kind of realize why, even when we have the option for a dub, I always say, like, no, we're going to do subtitles.
Yeah.
And it's just not the same, because somebody acting the part after it's been done just doesn't embody those emotions in the same way, because they are not there doing those things. Yeah. You can be a great voice actor, but if you're in a studio removed from it, it's a lot more difficult, and oftentimes the people they get to do dubs are also not great voice actors. So your first thoughts, you liked it quite a bit.
I quite liked it.
What do you like about this movie?
It was very cool, like, aesthetically. Last Christmas or 2 Christmases ago,
I gave you my heart. The very next day.
I gave it away. Man, I'm a jerk. When we watched the Rare Exports.
Oh, yeah, which is a very good Finnish kind of horror Christmas movie.
Yeah, so when we watched Rare Exports, we talked about like winter horror and the idea of like this like bleak, lonely kind of horror where like snow is really scary, and I'm probably not even saying the right thing right now, but it's very familiar living where we do, I guess, like, yes, because like we're literally in our house because we have to be legally, but also I don't know that we'd be going out much because it is dangerously cold outside right now.
Very true.
So I definitely think that this movie would hit differently if you were watching it in Florida and you didn't really know about snow or cold or how like...
But I think it does, regardless of your familiarity with it, it does kind of invoke a certain starkness and stillness, which just amplifies the isolation of this movie. Because I think isolation and loneliness, like you were saying, are definite big themes.
Yes. So I think that this looks like it could be, you were saying in the pre-episode, like it could have been our apartment complex.
Yes,
that
from
we
where
just
used to
moved out
live.
of.
Yeah.
These like 3-story kind of condo buildings that, yeah, it looked really cool. It looked very familiar. It looked very wintry. And all of those things did a really good job of kind of setting a mood before you even knew what was going on in the movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it looks exactly like the Oslo suburbs where I went to school. The dorms for the University of Oslo, they're out in the suburbs, and they were built in the 50s, which I assume these ones were. So
Yeah.
They look very similar. So was there anything in this movie that you did not like? Is there anything that you can identify that stops you from saying you love it?
How alike all the adults looked. That was hard. And you actually did explain it to me in the beginning of like who was who when they were all sitting in that pub.
Yes.
Or diner or whatever it was. Because honestly, I was having trouble who was a dad and who was like a neighbor and who was like...
Because there's that one character who's kind of like a bit of a drunk, and is that Laka? I forget his name. But then there is the kind of caretaker character, Håkon, who looks kind of similar.
Yeah.
And even if they don't look alike, I think what a lot of it is they all look average.
Yeah.
If you're watching a Hollywood movie, everyone's pretty remarkable looking. So even if, like, I contend that 90% of the famous Chris's look very similar. And if you were to describe them, they look...
Yeah.
It's the same description, mostly.
You're like tall, blonde, handsome men.
But they are all quite remarkable looking, so it's easier to differentiate, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Although I still get them mixed up.
Yeah, I know you do. Yeah, so that was kind of confusing, but you're right, they do look very similar. And I think that, and we'll talk about kind of how this is from a child's view later. Adults do kind of all look the same to children.
Yes, yeah.
So I think that could be something that maybe they tried to do of just like, they're just big people who are around. So I found that a little confusing. I was confused because for some reason, and I don't know where I got this idea, but that it was like a vampire outbreak and not just like one vampire.
Okay.
So I don't know.
So you thought that going into the movie?
I thought that going into the movie. So I thought that there would be like more.
Right.
So then there wasn't.
Yeah.
And then I was like kind of confused, but also just like watching the movie because that was what we were doing. So
well, I think it could very well be from this kind of idea that's just in our culture at the time. And to take that into a vampire movie makes sense. And also the cover of the Blu-ray I have is kind of someone at the window. So it kind of seems like there could be many people like that. And we have that. We were talking about zombies last episode as well. So that I could see where that comes from. But then you kind of get the opposite. You get a very quiet movie about one like 12-year-old vampire.
Who isn't like particularly dangerous. She has dangerous moments, but it's not like she's like one of those like Hollywood crazed kind of like, I'm biting everyone I can get my hands on and I'm making everyone into vampires. And like, she's relatively quiet and kind of unassuming.
Have you read any Scandinavian literature? Because in the last, let's say, I don't know, 15 years or so, a lot of these Scandinavian novels got very big and got turned into Hollywood movies. And they all tend to have a lot of similar features. So I want to be careful that we don't let any one film speak for a culture, because I hate when people do that. They're like, oh, I saw this in a movie, so that's what this place is like.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of books and movies around this time that depicts Scandinavia, usually Sweden, some of them are Norwegian, as a like idyllic, quaint place. And quiet, but then there's always something under the surface that is kind of rotten to its core, or there's corruption in the police service, or it's always like underlying themes. And I wonder if that is because when my time over there, I would say like their underlying issues is the white supremacism and racism that they don't like to talk about.
Right.
So like, yeah, we're all
just not
cool
going to acknowledge
here.
it. Yeah. Which is, the best thing to do with white supremacy.
Well, that's what we do here too, so. And I think we'll talk about that kind of stuff when we talk about the idea of an outsider and people who are not welcome in like polite society. So have you had a chance to read any of those, like Joe Nesbø and those types of ones?
I don't think so.
I know they are very popular. I work at a library and they just fly off the shelves.
Oh.
And also, I was saying that I did just finish this novel before we watched it. My first time reading the novel. So I'll mention a few things from the book here and there. So spoilers for that. But I guess we're like, talking about the movie.
I feel like we're going to spoil it. This
Yeah.
is the spoiler zone. Welcome to the spoiler zone.
All right, well, let's go back onto the look of the movie. It's very dark in all ways. The only light you get for the most part is the snow. And even then, it doesn't seem particularly bright, like on sunny days here in the winter.
Yeah.
Everything's kind of a bluish gray palette. And then the little bits of red we get are always with the violence. And even then, it's quite dark blood.
Yeah.
It's not like a super bright red.
Yeah. You don't get those like stark Hollywood reds, I guess, for blood.
Mm-hmm. Or realistic, because blood is... Every time you see a lot of blood, it looks fake.
Yeah.
It's too red.
It's too red.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it's true. Red, like, blood is kind of an unnatural color.
Yes, and especially when it's on snow or ice.
Yes.
That sounds terrible that I know that, but...
No, but everyone's like...
I grew up in Edmonton and played
a bloody nose in
hockey,
the snow,
right?
yeah.
So did you feel like the look of the movie kind of adds to the feeling of it?
For sure, yeah. I think, like I said, the snow is very reminiscent of like isolation and quiet and like doom.
Yeah.
So I think that really helps because there's like snow in most of the movie.
Yeah, there isn't a lot of interior stuff when you look at it.
No, there's like a few school things. There's a few things inside the apartments. But everything either kind of like begins or ends in the snow.
There's also a lot of walls and windows, which, of course, they talk through the wall with their Morse code.
Yeah.
But Oscar is almost always shot through a window when he is alone. And I think it's intentional to like further show how isolated he is.
Right.
Or maybe that's supposed to be like a vampire vision, like at the window looking in.
Maybe.
Waiting to get in, because that's a big theme too.
She's watching him.
Or she just wants in.
Yeah.
So other than it being dark, what did you think of the violence in this movie?
I didn't find it particularly like gory or like hard to watch.
No, because they hardly show anything.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, pretty much every kill is either covered or from very far away, so you don't actually see any like gruesome things for the most part.
No, you see kind of like blood on her face or hands or whatever. And then like blood in the snow. And then that's kind of it. You see her attack sometimes.
Yeah, it's like this movie doesn't celebrate violence. It doesn't try to like make it fun or glamorous like a lot of horror movies will. But it also doesn't shy away from it. Mm-hmm. It's not like, we're not going to show you this because we want to protect you. It's just, it gives you a very like journalistic view of it. It could be news footage for when the kills actually happen.
Yeah.
The camera seems to be much less dynamic, and it's just showing you what happens with very little cutting to accentuate anything.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd mentioned that a lot of the characters kind of blended in together, but there were actually only the two, I think, that you had issue distinguishing with. And they only are kind of together in one scene at the beginning.
Yeah.
But what did you think about the introduction of these characters who, in a lot of ways, you normally wouldn't get to hear anything from? Just like a guy and his cat-loving friend.
Because you don't really get like a huge amount of backstory on who these people are. It was I paid a little bit less attention to them, I guess, just because you don't get a huge backstory. You don't get to know these people before the story starts.
Right.
So I didn't really pay a lot of attention to them.
The movie spends like a good amount of time on these largely forgettable people. And I don't want to say forgettable performances, but I think they're meant to be just kind of anyone. And I don't mean that as a slight on the actors. I think it's done intentionally, that they're fleshing out this world, and it's kind of contributing to the depth of the world that they're making. It gives us a little bit of insight into them. Like you were saying, it doesn't give you a big backstory, but I think we are on the journey with them. can relate to them emotionally, because you see people lose their friends, and the movie takes time to explore this and have these characters talk about what they're feeling and trying to kind of solve a mystery. It's not really quite taken from a mystery point of view, but to them, these killings are impactful. Right. Did you find that at all?
I wasn't super, like I said, I wasn't super focused on them. I don't know, maybe I missed a big part of the movie. I don't know. I feel like my brain isn't with it today, but...
No, it's forgivable. We're both quite...
brain fogged?
Yes.
Which is a symptom of COVID.
If there's anything I do a lot of, it's just talk for minutes on end about movies on this podcast, but I'm having a lot of trouble doing it today.
And I'm having a really hard time, like, following your train of thought. So if this...
Well, it might be me not making any sense. So I'll just say what I'm trying to say.
Okay, you go. Because I don't know that I have anything to add.
I think they give us enough insight into these people that we care for them. In another movie, we wouldn't learn about the non-main characters. We wouldn't learn about a victim's friend, for instance.
Right.
This movie does. It's not one of those movies where you can, like, cheer when people are killed. Like, if you're watching your Friday the 13th,
right,
you're in it for the kills. You want to see, like, oh, how's this one going to happen? Oh, it happened, yay!
Yeah.
And it's fun. This is doing its best to not let you get into that territory. It's making sure that you know the impact that these deaths are having, even if it's... And these people are kind of portrayed as, like, you know, not being, like, big family people. They're not important business people. The one guy's just kind of like a guy who drinks at, I think, a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out what that restaurant was, but yeah.
Usually someone in this station of life would not be a big part of any movie, let alone a horror movie that's usually only in it for the kills. So I think by getting us to kind of relate to them or trying to understand them, that is put against our inability to also hate the villain, because the villain would kind of be Indy.
Yeah.
But in the movies where we're identifying with potential victims, we want to be scared of the killer. We want to hate the killer.
Yes.
This movie is kind of creating this like a moral gray zone, because we're being forced to sympathize with everyone in this film, and conversely, we're also forced to relate to this like timeless killer, right? Because one of the first times we see her kill someone, she cries afterwards.
Yeah.
So that's going to invoke some emotion into you, some sympathy. So you, the viewer, are kind of like Oscar. You're kind of caught in between. Like, yes, he's against the killing, but also he's clearly in love with her.
Oh.
Or them.
They.
It's tough. Maybe we should talk about that too. But I just like how it takes us beyond what the normal comfort zone of horror movies are. Because even if there's a movie where you're watching lots of people get killed and it's disturbing on that level, there's a certain predictability and a certain detachment.
Right.
Most often in those movies. And this does not provide that benefit of detachment. It's making you feel for the murderers as much as it is the people being murdered.
Right.
I do want to ask you your opinions on a few things before we continue in our discussion.
Okay.
Indy's gender. Do you have any thoughts there?
I feel like she was a little girl, and now maybe Indy's been a vampire for so long that she kind of feels like she's lost that. Like she's no longer human, so how could she be she's
a girl?
Like, how could I be a gender? Yeah, so maybe that's why, because she does say, like, I'm
not a girl.
I'm not a girl.
Yes.
Or, like, what if I wasn't a girl? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
So I think that, she or they, either one, maybe has been a vampire for so long. And I feel like maybe Indy has been a vampire for a long time because she has this caretaker, the Håkan. And so maybe she's just already worked out the system, right? Like, she knows she's going to be this little girl forever.
Well, I want to touch back on that in a moment, but let's go back one further sentence. Do you remember the scene where she gets out of the shower and Oscar sees them?
Yes.
And you get a shot of Ile's, like, crotch.
Yeah. It's not, like, human.
Well, there's a giant scar
Yeah.
where a penis would be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ile's a castrated boy.
Oh.
Was.
Oh.
And now is something else.
Interesting. I didn't catch that when we watched it, but...
The first time I saw the movie, I was like, wait, is that what happened? Because that was my first thought, is like, that looks like someone who had a male who had their genitals cut off.
Right.
And I was like, that can't be right. But the first time I watched it, I felt like the shot was a half second.
Mm-hmm.
This time I was ready for it. And I was like, well, this is a long shot.
Yeah.
I could sit and look at it. And I was like, ooh, yeah, that's what it is.
Oh.
And I did read the novel. I know that the movie should stand on its own, but the novel does explicitly say that that is the case.
Oh, okay.
That Ile was short for Ileish and was a boy, and then when turned into a vampire, was castrated, and then but it has no need for that anymore anyways, because they are a vampire.
Right.
So they don't urinate or anything.
Right.
Or procreate.
Or eat. Interesting. Well, that's something that I feel like the movie should talk about.
I wonder, because I kind of feel like just them saying, I'm not a girl, it doesn't really matter the backstory.
Yeah.
To Ile, they are not a girl.
Yeah.
And that's all that really matters?
But, like, why include that shot then? Because that's such a clear callback
true.
to the book.
Yeah.
And it just makes it confusing. It's like...
Or maybe it clarifies, but it doesn't lay it out as explicitly. It's like, oh, okay, fine, you want to question it? Here you go. There's your answer, if you're... But not enough of an answer.
No. Like,
I
why
feel
not
like
just leave it? Because then I'm not a girl can mean many things.
True. Yeah, you know what? That's true.
I came up with my own answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you have an answer, but like, if you're not going to include it in the movie properly, or like the way that it was in the book,
right?
Why include that shot, and like, why even open up that question?
Very true.
Like, why not just let viewers like me just make up their mind?
Then there's another question I have for you. Maybe let's ask 2 more questions. We don't need answers now because we're going to double back to them.
Okay.
But I want to know your takes before we get into them. You were saying that Håkon is kind of Ile's handler and has been for some time. What do you think is going on there?
I don't know. I couldn't really figure out what that was. But it seems like he's her like designated adult.
Yes.
Because you can't be a little kid in the world without like an adult sometimes.
I kind of like that most of the issues this movie deals with are the really mundane parts of being a vampire that no one would want to see in a movie.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do if you're a little kid? I actually wrote this movie. It was going to be a mockumentary called Interviews with Some Vampires. And it was going to be like mostly a comedy, and it was going to take place in Edmonton. And the premise was like, oh, the Edmonton has a very large vampire community because of its long winter nights, and there's not as much sun in the winter time, so it's a great place for vampires to visit in the winter. And one of the characters was this 13-year-old girl who is like complaining how she can't get into a bar or anything. And it was like a funnier version.
Right.
And then this movie came out, and I was like, oh, they did a better job of that. And then What We Do in the Shadows came out, and it's like, well, they did a better job of the whole movie, so I don't need to make this anymore. But I like that this movie kind of deals with that minutia.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think Håkon and Ile have been together for a long time?
Yes, I think so.
So another thing not really mentioned is, do you think there's any sort of romantic stuff going on between the two of them?
No.
What about between Ile and Oscar? Do you think there's love there?
I think he feels something for her in that like childlike crush sort of way. I think she maybe is for the first time realizing that she could like actually feel something for someone.
Or do you think perhaps now that Håkon is dead, she's just looking for a new person to take his place and is manipulating Oscar into being the new caretaker?
You read the book, I didn't.
Well, that is not in
okay.
That is not answered in either.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of just thought that Håkon was someone that like she was, I don't know, built up a relationship with before like revealing herself.
Perhaps he wanted to be around her a lot because he's a pedophile. It does mention that all the killings so far have been teenage boys.
Oh, interesting.
And he does watch outside of a window with all those shirtless boys.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That was creepy.
Yeah. We'll double back to those things. Well, let's talk about some of the other adult characters, kind of just in general. You know what movie that we talked about recently that the treatment of adults here most resembles to me?
What?
Peanuts and Charlie Brown.
Oh, yeah.
Because in all of the Peanuts stuff, the adults are literally faceless. And in here, they may as well be. Because everyone just kind of turns a blind eye to Oscar's life. And the movie is told through his point of view more than anyone's, right? So all the adults in here are just so disinterested in everything that's going on. And that just kind of further reinforces the isolation that he must be feeling.
Yeah, for sure.
Like everyone just believes that, like, oh, I fell on a rock.
Yeah.
Which is a thing people do.
And like no one actually checks on him.
And like you were saying, a lot of them kind of blend into each other. Let's talk about his father a little bit, because that one's treated a little specially because he has to go to see his father. It's somewhere else. There's the scene where he like smells his father's sweater, or when his father has that visitor come over, he gets really jealous that his dad's giving his attention to someone else. This might be another one of those things. Did you read anything into the visitor?
Not really.
They spend an unusually long time on the fact that he's wearing sandals.
Yeah.
And it's really cold out.
I didn't really know what to make of that.
I think it means that this guy is staying and stays a lot. I kind of assumed that was his father's lover.
Oh. Yeah, I didn't really get anything from that.
It was just such a weird shot to just show him in his socks and sandals for that long. I was like, this has to mean something. And then there's the kind of gym teacher who's very easily distracted to like all of what could have been Oscar's murder, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What are some vampire rules that you know?
No sun.
Garlic.
You have to drink blood to stay alive.
Right. Crosses.
Holy
water.
Yeah.
Fangs.
Steaks. Wooden steaks, not.
Well, they probably like other steaks too if they were really rare.
If they're just not cooked, yeah. That's also one thing that, like, when people become vampires, sometimes they'll just, like, eat raw meat because they don't understand, like, what the actual, like, urge that's happening is. So then they'll go to the fridge or whatever because they feel, like, the hunger, as it's often referred to as. And then the closest thing that they can get to, like, satiate themselves is, like, raw ground beef or something. So you'll see that.
That's called a Renfield syndrome. Do you know about Renfield?
No.
Renfield is from the original Dracula novel, and he is Dracula's familiar, meaning someone who like does his bidding.
Right.
Halkin is a Renfield.
Oh.
He's in servitude. There's that episode of Buffy where Xander becomes a Renfield when Dracula comes to town. Very good episode.
Oh, interesting.
So this idea of a vampire having a human helper is pretty established already in vampire lore. There's also the idea that they don't have reflections, and now that I say that, I realize that at the beginning of this movie, Oscar is alone in his room as he often is, and he's talking to his reflection.
Right.
Because that's all he has. But at least he has that. Eli doesn't even have that.
Oh, yeah. See, I didn't really make that connection. But
maybe I'm looking too much into it, but I think that's something.
You go too far into a movie? What?
Hey now.
What?
And there's an obsession with puzzles. That's in older vampire stuff. It doesn't get used very much anymore, but
really?
It's in this one.
Oh, see, I don't know that one.
Yeah, in old vampire movies, it used to be a thing that you would like throw toothpicks or something on the ground and they have to count them. It's like a vampire compulsion. Or if there's a puzzle, they have to do it.
Interesting.
Some stuff even has, if there's a mirror, they have to look at it. Not that they don't have a reflection, but they're drawn to mirrors.
They just have to look.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's how you could you get ward off vampires or protect yourselves. You put mirrors on the outside and they'd be stuck looking at them. Or you'd put a bunch of stuff on the ground and they'd have to count them and it'd give you a warning that the vampire's coming.
I did know that, like, mirrors are, like, Because one of the things is that you get, like, really, really beautiful when you become a vampire.
Oh, see, that's in all the ones that you love, all the romantic vampire ones, in your interview with a vampire.
Yeah.
I think this came out the same year as the first Twilight.
Really?
Isn't that like
What's
an
that?
interesting counterpoint? Because it's the same idea. Both of these have a very old person who looks young, kind of falling in love with someone who's actually of that age. But in Twilight,
Oh,
it's
it
like,
did, yeah.
in Twilight, it's cool.
Yeah.
In this one, you're like, oh, there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
Which is the proper reaction.
That is the correct response to a vampire, yes. Have you seen any of the Twilight movies? Or read any of the books?
Some of the first one.
Okay.
I think it was shot well, and I thought it was surprisingly terrible. Like, I thought it was going to be bad, but it was way worse than I expected.
The books aren't much better.
And then I was teaching high school at the time, so someone was reading. I was like, all right, I'm going to sit down and read it. So I read about a half hour's worth of it, and I thought it was just terribly written. Like, I guess I'm not even going to comment on the story because I don't know it that well, but the actual quality of writing I found very, very poor.
The books, the quality of writing is very, very poor. And there's a lot of, like, vaguely Mormon stuff happening.
Oh. I hope you pick Twilight for your next movie. I'd love to talk about that, and it would be a very interesting counterpoint to this. But the piece of vampire lore that I want to talk about most is from the title of this movie, and the idea that they have to be invited in.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that so much of vampire lore, it comes from actual real things.
Yeah.
So this one probably comes from 1376 when the Mongols arrived at Kaffa, and they had this blood disease, so they were like coughing up blood everywhere, and then they weren't allowed into the gates of the city.
Right.
So then they started throwing their diseased bodies over the fortress walls.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably where that part comes from. But the title comes from Morrissey, who very talented, very vegetarian, but also pretty racist. So
right.
Take what you want from that. And that song was called Let the Right One Slip In. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest themes of this movie, because very literally it deals with that a few times, because Ile has to be invited into the space. But the big theme about the movie is people who are outsiders and are then let into people's lives, and the effect of letting someone into your life and what that can be. Because for better or worse, Oscar's life is completely changed by the fact that he let Ile into his life.
Yes. Yeah, it's really interesting. I was thinking on that, and I was thinking about, like, what does it mean? And, like, I'm not a critical thinking kind of person right now because of my brain, but I think that the idea that you can't come in because you're not human is really interesting. And I think it's interesting the way that they did it with Ely, and saying, like, no, you have to tell me that I can come in. Say that I can come in, when she's, like, panicked about her dad in the hospital. Or,
Her Renfield?
Her Renfield in the
Her
hospital.
familiar?
I was going to say Renoir. In the hospital, like, you have to say, like, this exact thing to let me in. So, yeah, it's interesting. Because most of the time when she enters buildings, it's not to do something bad. She's usually going into, like, Oscar's room to just, like, hang out with him, like, do kid stuff, right?
Yeah, because she has not been let in to most places.
Yeah.
They're both set up as outsiders, of course. So Oscar is kind of portrayed as potentially a serial killer in the making.
Yeah.
And he's always looking for sympathy from his parents, and he's not finding it. He's clearly not popular in school. He's bullied very harshly, and he's set up as being an outsider. And I think one reading of the movie, I don't believe this because I think in movies, people say something that is symbolic, and they go, oh, therefore it is not real and only in that person's head, which is a weird way it can be symbolic and real. Because, like, Ile is Oscar's ultimate fantasy, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody who is like him, an outsider of the same age, but has the power to take the revenge that he desperately wants.
Yeah.
But she is clearly also a real person in this movie. Or a real vampire, at least. And that's set up, like I was saying at the beginning, when he's doing that squeal like a pig and he's fighting nobody,
Mhm.
but he's talking to his reflection, and it shows you how lonely that is. But then, if you think about it, that Ili doesn't even have that reflection. And she's even further isolated because she's isolated from humanity, really, right? And she literally needs to be invited in everywhere, just as Oscar needs somebody else to make that jump and invite him into some sort of relationship, some sort of friendship, something like that. And the closest he gets is taking up that coach on the offer of the weight training.
Right.
But there's not any real connection there.
No.
So I think this is probably the time where we get into that debate of whether Ili is actually genuine in her feelings for Oscar, or if she is manipulating him just for her own purposes. And I think every point can work either way, just depending on how you feel about her and how truthful she is. And again, I already defaulted to she because that's how Oscar
refers to her.
Yeah, and we're kind of seeing this all through
I think
his eyes.
That's okay.
Okay.
Right now. Because, yeah, we're looking at this from Oscar's view.
Right.
And especially this relationship that we're talking about.
Right. So eventually, Ile is able to, like, share the darkest secret about, yes, I'm a vampire, here are the things. And you could say, like, oh, well, that is proof that she's being very open and honest, but also she would need to tell that if she wants him to work for her. And I think that comes about in that scene where she has that, like, egg puzzle thing that shatters into a bunch of pieces.
Right, yeah.
And that's her letting him into that whole world.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite scenes in the whole movie is where this title really comes to a head, and she enters Oscar's house without invitation because he's like, yeah, do it. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And then she just starts to bleed everywhere. And he goes and hugs her and says, you're invited in. And he feels so bad. And she is kind of at her weakest state. Or I guess she's in that state a few times in this movie. On a side note, I love when they make her, like, kind of age.
Yeah.
When she hasn't eaten.
She looks all dry and brittle and, like, her hair's messy.
And her eyes go gray.
Yeah.
And she kind of smells bad, apparently.
Yeah.
But in that scene, he asks her, like, what are you? And she says, I'm just like you. And he says, like, but no, we're not the same because you kill people. I wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, well, you would if you could. You just don't have the opportunity to. And I do it because I have to. And one of my favorite lines is she says to him, be me a little. And I really like that. Just that's what both of them need. Both of them need someone to be them a little.
Right.
Both of them need someone to see things from their point of view.
Yeah.
And they've never had it in their lives. And it's, I think, despite how negative a take I have on most things, I think I have this innate positivity that I really want to believe that they're in love, because there are these moments, and maybe it's not romantic love as we know it, because she even says, like, well, I can't be all of those things, and he's fine with it. He just wants to be near her, and he's fine doing what they're currently doing.
Right.
And there's some scenes they have together where it just seems so very real. Especially if we are to believe Ili when she says that I'm still 12. I've just been 12 for a long time. Like, she doesn't have an adult's mind. She still has a 12-year-old's mind.
Right.
If we believe that, then clearly they have some sort of really strong
bond. Yeah.
Love, companionship, something like that.
Yeah.
But what if she has the brain of a adult, someone who's been around for like 200 years, and she's just saying that? It could very easily go either way.
Very true. Vampires can be manipulative.
And she's kind of just resigned to this life, this life of being a perpetual 12-year-old. So on the idea that she's manipulating him, you could say when she meets him, he's acting like someone who wants to kill people.
Right.
He's literally talking about killing people and stabbing a knife into a tree. That's her first introduction. So it kind of stands to reason that she'd be like, well, this is someone that I can work with. They're already at that point. I just need to give them a little push.
Yeah.
And she does. She encourages him to be violent. She says, like, you have to hit back and hit back hard. And she's proud of him when he does that. And she sees how lonely he is. And I think it's right after the scene where she kills Håkan. And when she, like, sucks his blood and drops him, it's just like trash. It's like a gum wrapper.
Yeah.
She drops him from the window, And he has like the most undignified death because he kind of bounces off that awning or
Oh,
something.
yeah, that was awful.
And she throws him away.
Yeah.
And I believe it's right after that the next shot, she comes into Oscar's window and crawls into bed with him.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of seems like, well, I'm done with that one. I need to like go all in on this one.
I could see where you're going with that, yeah.
But I truly don't want to believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I did believe a lot of the scenes they had together. They seemed just so heartfelt, but maybe it's all on Oscar's end. It's hard to differentiate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of another one of those, like, without reading the book, because I didn't.
But the book does not have a take on this either way. This part is presented as it is in the movie. Like, these things happen.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get any insight into Ili. We only get insight into Oscar in the book. So we don't know what she's thinking. We just know these events happen as they do in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So the only extra information is we know that Ili's older. She's not just like 30 or 40. She's probably like 100 or 200.
Right.
But that doesn't really change this.
Yeah.
And I think the movie does get into that a little bit because when she has all those treasures, you kind of assume they're all from previous people, right?
Mm-hmm.
She has a bunch of super old stuff.
Yeah.
Did you like that kind of, not final scene, the second to last scene in the pool?
Yeah.
There's that one really cool shot where Oscar is underwater and being held there, and you kind of just hear a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the background, a severed head falls in.
I liked that.
And then the arm that's holding him gets cut off and falls in as well.
Yeah.
I think it was very well done.
Yeah, I liked that. It was kind of in the style of not too much gore or like murder, like visible murder. You get to see a severed head and a severed hand, yes, but you don't see them being like ripped off or anything. No. So I think that was like kind of a neat way to do it. And I think that Ili was trying to shelter him from that too, right? Like there's a reason she didn't pull him out of the water first and then attack them.
Oh, that's true.
I was kind of thinking like, because he is a child and he hasn't seen stuff like this. So maybe she's trying to, keep him a little innocent.
That makes sense. Also, when he comes up, this is like the single biggest smile we get in the entire movie. Because he just seems thrilled. Because she, in his mind, was already gone.
Mm-hmm.
And he's looking at her going like, you came back for me. Like, somebody loves me. Mm-hmm. And he's just so thrilled. I don't even think it's joy in relief, like, hey, I didn't drown. I think it's more that
she's there.
Somebody's there for me.
Yeah.
And he's never had anyone look out for him like this before. He's just been abandoned by all people in his mind.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. And then before we get into the very last scene and kind of wrap things up, did you feel like Håkan was a paternal figure to her? Because you didn't feel like any sort of romantic stuff.
No.
You just kind of thought he was there?
I felt like he was just like a caretaker.
But why? Why would he risk his life to do this?
I think Ili might have threatened him a little bit.
Oh.
I didn't feel like they were romantically involved. I didn't feel like he had any kind of paternal bond to her. Mm-hmm. It felt more like he was obligated to do so because he was kind of just forced into it or whatever.
But if he's forced into it under threat of violence, I don't think any violence that she's going to do is worse than him pouring acid on his face so he can't be recognized. And then at the end, he just gives his life to her anyway. Mm-hmm. He's like, well, I've done all I could do. And gives his life and dies and gets thrown away like trash. So I don't know what threat of violence could be worse than those two things.
I don't know. Maybe she has some kind of ability to compel him.
A glamour.
A glamour? Yeah. Some sort of like...
Then do you think Oscar is glamored?
No, I don't think Oscar is glamored right now.
Because he seems jealous, Håkan does. Because he has that line of like, promise me one thing, don't see that boy.
I think he's just worried that she's gonna eat Oscar.
But she eats other people.
Yeah, but Oscar's a child.
But he murders children.
Yeah, but he's like little. I don't know.
I kind of felt like he is a pedophile and wants to be close to Ili, and she's not having it. Mm. And she is very commanding of him. She is clearly in control in that relationship.
Right.
And because there's that time when she comes home and says like, all right, get out. and makes him leave the room so she can go knock on the door, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he does whatever, and he is kind of just at the end of his usefulness. He's gotten old, he's gotten sloppy, and she makes note of like, what are you doing out there? You're fucking everything up for us. And it seems like he's been doing this for a while. Whether or not he was like Oscar and they met when he was 12, maybe. But it seems to me like they met when he was older, and he's in it because he's like a child's body that's not illegal. Yeah, I'm down. I think that's where he's coming from. Yeah.
Gross.
It is gross.
That is gross.
And he then, when he gives his life and like burns his face off first, he's resigned. He's like, well, I have nothing more to give her.
Yeah.
And he even says at one point, when he's going to go kill someone else, like he says, this is all I can do. He has nothing else to offer her. So then in the last scene, we get Oscar on a train with a big giant box, which we assume Indy is inside.
Yes.
What did you take away from that?
I don't know. It seemed kind of sweet and innocent from Oscar's point of view. And they're like off on an adventure.
It does seem like that.
Like it feels like she's rescued him and he's sort of
They've
rescued
each
her.
other,
Yeah. So maybe it's not quite as sweet based on some of the things that you took away from it. But I think that it feels like they're off on some kid-like adventure.
Sure, even if you believe the intentions of both of them, that they both really genuinely care for each other, what happens next? Oscar's life is done. He is now spending his life caring for her. And how long can he do that for before he gets caught? Like, Oscar's life is over at the end of this movie. And it's played, I can't remember the music, but it seems it's like a brighter scene than
it is a
of
brighter
it.
scene.
And it seems like it's kind of uplifting. And you're like, oh yeah, they've escaped. He's going to be happy with her. She's going to be happy with him. Why would we think that? Like, in 48 hours even, what are they going to do? Are they going to go get an apartment somewhere? Who's going to rent an apartment to a 12-year-old?
Yeah.
How is she going to feed? What is he going to do? Is he going to go enroll in school somewhere? He's a runaway child who is probably wanted in connection with all of these murders in a pool. Like, his life is over.
Yeah.
He's on the run for the rest of his life, unless he stops right there. But it doesn't look like he's going to. It's a lot darker of an ending than I think I first realized. So it seems like you're not convinced by my dark take, or at least you don't want to be, and that's fine.
I don't want to be. No.
Let's wrap up on this movie. What are your final thoughts on Let the Right One In?
I think it's a very interesting take on a very overdone kind of theme. It's different. It's kind of fun. It's fun to see different like takes on stuff, right? Like, I've seen a lot of vampire movies and I've read a lot of vampire books. So it's like it's kind of neat to see how another culture or like author will take the same kind of myths and make it feel and look very different.
Yeah, it kind of seems like if what's his name? Cedric Diggory. What's the vampire's name? Oscar, not Oscar. Edward. If Edward were actually in our world, this is a life he would actually live.
Yeah.
Right? It wouldn't be all sparkling and making out with high school girls. And playing really weird baseball. Isn't that in that movie?
Yeah.
That was the worst.
We'll get there.
Okay. He would have to live this kind of life of always being on the run and living in gross places because you can't exist in the modern world as a faceless murderer. You can only do that for so long. You can't do it for hundreds of years.
No. Yeah, so I think it's worth seeing. Like I said, I didn't like love it, but I enjoyed it and I can appreciate it for what it is. And I still love a vampire movie, so I say, yeah, go watch it if you like vampire movies. So, Indy, you're still in love with this movie?
Yeah. The one thing that was different than I remember looking a lot more polished. It's a grimier movie than
It is a grimier movie, yeah.
Because it is a low budget in the grand scheme of movies we talk about. It's quite low in the budget, but it still holds up. And I think I took away different things this time. Like, I really appreciated the juxtaposition of the horrific and the mundane, and the kind of blending of those two.
Right.
Which is not something we see very often. You don't get to see, like, the day-to-day workings of a serial killer. That's not something people are typically interested in.
Right.
And I like that it explores depression, desperation, isolation, the cruelty of children, which is a big part of this as well. Right. And yeah, like you, I love a different take on something that I thought I was tired with. Because I like Buffy. Yeah. I don't like a lot of vampire stuff. It's like Buffy and Nosferatu. A lot of it is kind of junky. But this one I love. And now that I'm saying it, I realize it's just taking the characters from any of those other movies and putting them in our actual world, dealing with actual problems. And that was a very obvious reinvention of the genre, but one that surprisingly hasn't existed. I guess What We Do in the Shadows is the funny version of the same thing, because it's vampires in our world. Right. And I can't recommend that enough as well. But now, after our talk about the last part there, all I'm left with is debating if this is a movie that shows you that love can triumph even in the most impossible circumstances, or if this is about how the lonely and desperate can easily be manipulated. Because it can go either way, looking at the exact same stuff. And I don't have a good answer. All I know is Oscar's life is going to be terrible. It's not going to get better. He'll now have one person, but yeah, at what cost? Did he let the right one in? I don't know. I don't think he did. Whoa. Yeah. Well, I think we'll end it there for our talk on Let the Right One In, because we are each becoming increasingly out of breath the more we talk. But Samantha, who is our second sponsor of the evening?
Our second sponsor of the episode is the Edmonton Community Foundation and the Well Endowed podcast, hosted by Andrew Paul and Elizabeth Bongnick, produced by Lisa Pruden, explores the impact of passionate people who are working to make Edmonton a strong, vibrant city to live in. The Edmonton Community Foundation helps people create endowment funds, and the podcast tells the story of how those endowments intersect with the community. You can subscribe at thewellendowedpodcast.com and hear all about some of the inspiring things that they're doing.
Awesome. So you can check them out wherever you are listening to us currently. And next week, we are going to be presenting a couple of spoiler-free reviews of things we've been into lately with our Things of the Week. And then Samantha will let us know what we're watching for the big watch the week after that.
It's going to be mid to late 2000s. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it's going to be.
I hope it's Twilight. I'm really into that now. That idea.
Okay. We'll see.
Because I love vampire baseball.
Well, you'll have to tune in next week with Indy and find out what we will be watching. Okay, we'll see you next week, everyone. Bye.
Stay safe, everyone.
Coughing break. Yeah. Brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network.